excited. Guys, just keep eating. Don't worry about what I say. Just make some unremarkable remarks here. I want to welcome everybody out for a big Warwickian welcome to everybody, members, friends, free staters, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome out to Old Warwick Courthouse in beautiful downtown Denton. I keep using the same jokes. As you've heard, we're here today on the last acre of Warwick County, Virginia, and if we can try, we can feel the presence of many Warwickians of yesteryear joining with us today. Say hi to them. Good. Here we are still kind of doing what the locals did. They had gatherings at the courthouse. They ate, of course, all the time. And they probably did some mischievous things. I know they did. Anyway, they were meeting at the courthouse, having fun eating. It's a good thing. We can return to simpler times and traditions for just a moment every third Wednesday as we march through November. So that's why you're here today. Thank you for coming. Let's take a moment and welcome Principal Chief Charles Bowman and members of the Kiskiak tribe. Would you like to introduce your members?
Yes, I would. Good afternoon, everybody. I am Chief Charles Delaware Bowman with the Kiskiak tribe. Our roots go back up to Powhatan, Pocahontas, Gloucester. With me today, I have a few of my tribe members. I have my Vice Chief, Ronald Wayne Bowman. He's my Vice Chief. My secretary, my sister, Pat Brown. Dr. Woodrow Tad. Power advisor. He's a doctor at Norfolk State University. Yes. Marbury Island, descendant, Australia, married Australia. Yes, she's going to speak with us, okay, on a short conversation. Marbury.
Thank you for coming today, sir.
Thanks for having us. It's been a pleasure.
All right. All right, I also wanted to welcome everybody who ventured out from our old stomping grounds, Mulberry Island, to join us today. They brought food and fun in our presentation today. So, Patrick, would you please introduce our people from Mulberry Island?
Yeah, sure. So, first we have our flight chief, one of the ladies that make our work possible. This is Cindy Pettit.
Cindy?
We were lucky enough to get the opportunity to work with her, and directly under her is our environmental chief, Don Calder. We really support the work that we do and value what we do here, not only on the installation but in the local community. Let's thank we have our pit master here, Paul James. He's the one that did the port bar. And we have our two people from Natural Resources, our Natural Resource Chief, Adam Priestley, and Wildlife Biologist Joe Chither. And then, of course, I'll let you introduce the speaker.
Okay. Courtney and Cindy. Okay. All right, thank you.
No, hold on. I forgot, just because they had it working. This is Jasmine Argott.
Okay.
Margaret.
What's not here?
I'm not here last name. Yeah, she works here too, but she's sort of the glue that holds everybody together. She communicates, she runs Earth Week. She does a lot of things, and without her and without teamwork between all of us, none of this is possible.
So you like?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. We Okay, our guests who've come today, thank you, welcome for coming. Apparently they come for food, so that's good. I hope you'll enjoy today's presentation. Consider coming back for the guests that are here today. Finally, thank you to our, and not finally, but really firstly, thank you for our members in the society. Keeps everything going. Your membership makes these kind of things happen, so here we are. To everyone who prepared food today for this event, thank you for keeping traditions alive, keeping us all fed. So that's kind of like a lot of welcomes and thank yous. A couple of quick society business things, I mean like really quick. The courthouse has taken some big steps. We've been working over there a little bit, or I have been, that's rare. We have all our new computers set up, all the new printers, everything's working right finally. We got everything transferred like it's supposed to be. Sharon finished cataloging a big genealogy collection. Yay. She started that in February 24th. She just finished. I think it's somebody in here surprised for it, but it's okay. So the courthouse is good. We're recovering from the big paint job over there. It seemed like a small thing, but we had to move everything out of the 1810 courthouse. And we have not recovered from that yet. We still have to set the museum up and different things. So anybody want to help? Come on, Wednesdays. Enough with all that. Thank you again for supporting and coming out today. We're going to move on. Introducing our speaker today. We have two of them, which is good. Fort Eustis Cultural Resource Manager Courtney Burkett, whom we all know and love very much. She grew up in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, but she's not Amish. She made sure to say that. She's a BA in anthropology in Grinnell College in Iowa, master's in anthropology from the College of William & Mary. She worked for William & Mary Center for Archaeological Research before joining Fort Eustis Cultural Resources team in 2008. In 2024, after Chris McDade left, she became the Cultural Resources Manager, the big wig. Thank you for coming out today. Sophie Thacker Watney, I did her a disservice. I called her an intern. She's not an intern. She's bona fide, totally bona fide. So she graduated from William & Mary in 2024 with a bachelor's degree in anthropology. Throughout college, Sophie completed several archaeological related internships with groups such as Fairfield Foundation, the Virginia State Parks Cultural Resources Department, and of course Fort Eustis Cultural Resources Department. After her undergraduate degree, Sophie began working as an archaeological field technician at Dutton & Associates, a private archaeology firm in Richmond, which was absorbed by Timmons Group last summer. Sophie kept working as a field tech for Timmons until October of 2025, when she began her position as a CEMML archaeologist with the Fort Eustis Cultural Resources Department. She's excited to be part of the team and to continue that department's legacy of good work, which they do. And at this point, I'm going to welcome up our first speaker today, Courtney Burkett.
So this is going to be about a new site that we identified recently. We started working on it actually when Sophie was an intern a couple of years ago, but other things take precedence, and so it took us a while to finish surveying and actually have it be a real acknowledged site. That would help.
No one before the thing. There you go.
Okay, let me see if this. Sorry, technical difficulties. Yeah, so we finally have a changer thing for our slides, but we've never used it before. Okay, so this is roughly where it is. See, that's all in Fort Eustis. And it's on this sort of marsh island thing where there's marsh all around it, but you can walk to it, it's just wet sometimes. And the reason we picked this area to look at is because in the 80s, most but not all of Fort Eustis was surveyed by this group called, BAR is what we usually call it, but it was the Middle Atlantic Archaeological Research Incorporated. And they had a sort of idiosyncratic way of surveying where they made these blocks of land and they gave each one a Roman numeral, and then within that they dug a shell test pit every, I think, 100 feet, which is a little farther than we would do today, but for the time, I guess that was acceptable. Anyway, but for some reason, they didn't dig in certain areas, they just neglected them. I'm not sure if it was too hard to get to them, or they thought there wasn't much chance of anything being there, but we've been trying to fill in gradually over the years and see if there's anything in this area. So, here, that's where the work was done. And there's a closer view of it. You can see how the marsh surrounds it. So no one really goes there except hunters. And we know that people have been on Mulberry Island, which is now Fort Eustis, for thousands of years, like at least 10,000 years back to what we call the early Archaic, but probably before that too, because there's been earlier stuff found at Jamestown Island that instead of floating, why would people not have just come down the river? Plus, stuff that's that old, unless you find really like a spear point that you know that style at a certain age, a lot of the things that survive from back then, just like you can't tell when it's from. It could be like any time when people made stone tools. So it's possible we have older sites and we just don't realize how old they are. But anyway, we know that we have at least 10,000-year-old sites. And then of course the English came in the 17th century, and this part of Mulberry Island was patented by William Pierce, who owned a lot of land at Jamestown and on Mulberry Island. And he had like 13 indentured servants that he sent to farm his land and so on. And after him, there's sort of a gap in the records because a lot of stuff was lost in the Civil War. But when the Army purchased the land in 1918, they made this map showing where each plot of land was, like wrote down the owner, how big it was, and there's another document that shows how much they paid for each plot. But here, we're not sure if it's on number 58 or 59. You probably can't read the thing, but one is owned by Meyer Brothers, one by FL Tennis, but it's in that area somewhere. That's the next documentation we have in that area, but it doesn't really help us with it. Anyway, so how do we identify sites? Like, what do we actually do when we go out and say we're surveying for a site, or, well, we don't know there's going to be a site. If we're surveying an area to see if there's any archaeological material, what do we do? Dig a bunch of little holes and screen the soil. These, I don't know if anybody remembers Harrison. He was our intern last year. Yeah, last year. Was good. And then we also had, briefly, we had Chardonnay with us. She is a doctoral student at William & Mary who's using some of the sites at Fort Eustis for her dissertation. So she was with us for a little while, and her knowledge came in handy later, but I'll get to that. So what we do is we lay out this grid where have a straight line every 15 meters, but 50 feet, but dig a little hole about that big, and just screen the soil, see if anything comes out of it. And here's part of my map that I drew back then. So you can maybe see down here, all these little circles are where the shovel tests were. The ones down here that I filled in are where we found something in that one, and I wrote down holes in there too. And then you can kind of see too, there's like a concentration of positive, that's what we call the shovel tests that have something in them. That's toward the south end of that little island. There are several positive shovel tests, but there are some elsewhere too. And it's not like there's just some at one end or some there and some. It's like fairly, not exactly evenly spread throughout the island, but not divided enough that you say there's more than one site. Like we call the whole thing one site because there's no real division, and it's also not that big an island. I mean, in real life, people don't just stay on one end of something; they walk all over, and like they use the whole landscape. So, anyway, that's. I have just also a few landscape pictures, so you see what it's like. This is looking from the new site out towards the James River, but there's another little sort of island rising above the marsh there. Here is the nice part to work in. There's like fairly open. It was nice and sunny when there were gnats. There was enough breeze off the river that drove the gnats away from there. And then here's the less nice part that's really overgrown, and the gnats stay there with you. And in fact, Harrison and I just had to leave early one day. It was just too bad. We couldn't tolerate it anymore. Anyway, so after all this digging, what did we find? Well, it wasn't a ton of stuff, really. And it was all like really small pieces of whatever it was, like small glass, small ceramics, and so on. But out of the total, about half of it was lithic and brick, and out of that half, like about half was lithic and so a quarter of the total stone pieces and brick fragments. No like major bricks. I think there might have been like a slightly less than half brick. Well, that was the biggest that we found. And then the rest, there's like some metal, mostly nails, some ceramics, some glass, a few smoking pipe fragments. I have some pictures though. Here. So like when you're making stone tools, you have your hammer stone, and you just like hit one stone with another stone, and these flakes come off, and then you can modify the flake into some kind of tool, or you can sometimes just use the flake on its own, but that would be another talk. And besides flakes, ceramics, tin glazed earthenware that's lost its glaze. Sometimes you can find the glaze separately, and it looks kind of like eggshells. It's just like this little thin stuff. We didn't find that here, but I've seen it elsewhere. Stoneware, porcelain. Somebody was sort of well off at some point to have some porcelain there. And some more interesting sort of sherds. So this is where Chardin, having studied 17th century stuff more than the rest of us, realized that we had a couple that were from the Morgan Jones workshop. Morgan Jones he started off as an indentured servant in 1661. He came to Maryland and worked there, and then when he worked off his indenture, he moved to Westmoreland County, where he entered a partnership with this other guy, Dennis White, for the making and selling of earthenware. But about 3 or 4 months later, White died, so like their whole thing fell apart then. But they produced enough in that time that it's been found throughout sites in the Tidewater area, so it's a good dating tool, especially since this kiln only lasted for a year. Or not a year, but it was only in 1 year, because they know it's 1677. And in the 70s, they found it and excavated it. There would have been like a dome over that round part too to hold the heat in when they're firing the pottery. Here's a drawing of the kind of things that they made there. And if you had the right part of your vessel, this starburst maker's mark would be on it, but we didn't have that pottery. And another potter that you may have heard of, the poor potter in Yorktown. This was the largest known pottery in colonial America, and it wasn't really supposed to exist. I mean, this would be a whole other talk too, but I'll tell you some highlights of what I was reading about preparing this. William Rogers was the poor potter, but he wasn't actually poor, and he personally wasn't a potter. He was like the business owner, and other people did the potting, and they made the stuff. And they found another, I guess the 70s was just a time for digging up kilns because they found this one too in Yorktown. And you can go visit it. But they made like bird bottles, mugs, chamber pots, like whatever. They made it all pretty much. And it was equal quality of what you would import from Britain. And like at the time, the law like really restricted local industry because they wanted the colonists to import everything from England. But somehow this enterprise not only started but like was allowed to keep going and exist. In fact, the governor wrote in 1732. He wrote to London and was like, "As to manufactures set up, there's but one poor potter's work for coarse earthenware, which is of so little consequence that I dare say there hath not been in 20 shillings worth less of that commodity imported since it was set up here than was before." And it's like he's covering for the guy, like saying it's not big enough to affect their imports or anything. But anyway, so interesting was that. Not surprising that we would have some here when we're not far from Yorktown, but just fun to find like recognizable potters in the record here. And then besides ceramics, there's also I think mentioned metal artifacts. There's mostly nails, mostly cut nails, which are from the 19th century. They would just like have a long piece of metal and just cut it into the nails. And glass, dark green bottle glass from wine bottles. And smoking pipes. We didn't get many pieces of this, but they were there, and people were smoking everywhere all the time back then. There's also, from this, like, you can see 2 of them have at least part of the stem here. And you can measure the diameter of the hole in the stem, and there's somebody in the past figured out this calculation where if you take the average of those bore diameters from the stems and plug that in, that's X, and then you do this equation, and then Y will be your date. So we got 1760 from that, but we only had 2 to measure from, so it was more just like a fun thing we could do. It's not really something I would like depend on for a date for overall, but we also have stuff from like throughout all of time basically, so it's what we call a multi-component site. It has things from many different time periods, so it's not like I'm trying to say this is a late 18th century site. It's an everything site, basically. And also, well, two things from this. One is, I think that this site is probably related to these other two sites near it. This one is one that goes back to the early archaic 10,000 years ago and on, and I think people kept coming back because there's river cobbles that are easily accessible there, and it's a good place to get the material that you need to make your stone tools. There's not a lot of places where you find like good stone around here, and my friends who do flint knapping would say there's like no flint. Like I was just recently telling somebody that we found mostly quartzite there, and I'm like, oh, quartzite, like it's hard to work with compared to chert and obsidians, but it's what we have, and people did a really good job with what they had here. But anyway, so especially if in the past the marsh was less marshy in this part, it would be really easy to just walk over and keep doing whatever you're doing over here too. Then this part, this is well now there's some training stuff there, but it was an 18th, 19th century site, and I mean, there's historical period artifacts there too. So I don't know if this was, it doesn't seem like really big enough to be worth farming, but I'm just speculating. It could have been a place where they like take their animals to graze. It could have, or they could have had gardens, like whatever. But people, as I think I said before, they just walk all over. They don't like limit themselves to one little thing. And so anyway, so at the end, when we finally finished all our shovel testing and analyzed the artifacts and so on, we registered the site with the Department of Historic Resources, and they gave us an official site number, which is 44 NN 372. The 44 means it's in Virginia. So like every site in the U.S. has this three-part number. It's the Smithsonian trinomial system. So alphabetically, not counting Alaska and Hawaii, but like it goes alphabetically, and then so Virginia was 44th, and then they set this up before Alaska and Hawaii were states, so that's why they got tacked on the end. But NN means Newport News, so you can already tell where it is there. And it's like Williamsburg is WB, James City County is JC, something like. And the last it's the 372nd site in Newport News. And I just checked a couple weeks ago, I guess. Right now there's 373 total. We have most of them, but that's also because we've looked for them more than the rest of Newport News has looked. And we also have site number 1 on Fort Eustis. I mean, it's not, well actually it is kind of, I think it's a special site, but it just happens to be number 1. It's not other than that. So anyway, as you can see, it's not easy to get to this site. Only hunters go there. It's not used for training, as far as I know. You have to, depending on the tide, it can be really squishy to get there. You like start sinking in the mud. In fact, we had to like mark certain areas because like quicksand. You're just like walking along, suddenly you're like halfway down. Anyway, so the point is, it's unlikely that anyone is going to develop this area. So we don't really need to do anything else with it right now. But if for some reason something is going to happen sometime in the future, now we know there's a site there, and that can help with planning stuff because we know either need to avoid it or we need to do some more work and see whether the site is eligible for the National Register of Historic Places. Like all we know right now is that it's not eligible, so we call it potentially eligible, but we don't know if we dug any more, is there enough to really help us learn anything new, or is it just like what we already found is pretty much everything, we don't know. But there's no plans for anything after that. And I think that is the end of my part here.
All right.
I have it written down, but I don't remember right now. Yeah, I figured I'm gonna guess like around 10, but I can let you know later if you really care. Yeah.
On the solid ground, I know you said it's a lot of marsh and all.
Yes.
But on the solid ground, would y'all consider doing a GPS ground illuminating system?
Yeah, I mean, we'd like to do the ground thing. We just have to find somebody who knows how to use the equipment, but yeah.
Because that would help a whole lot.
Yeah.
If there are no other questions, I'm going to go ahead and keep going. thanks to everybody for having us today. We're really excited to be able to present for you guys. Like I was introduced earlier, I'll just say it again, I'm Sophie, newest employee with Patrick and Courtney. And I'm going to be talking more along the theme of your presentations for the year with the 250th anniversary of America, talking about Black loyalism in the Revolutionary War. So just a preamble, the Revolutionary War was obviously a very difficult period of time for all people living in the 13 colonies. But most of the stories that were told in the historical narrative are those of the prominent white Americans, be it patriot or loyalist, either way. And my presentation is going to give you sort of a glimpse into the perspectives of enslaved Black Americans whose stories have not been told nearly as much as their counterparts. And so through the presentation, we'll explore motivations and experiences of enslaved Black Americans who chose to fight for their own freedom by allying with the British. So I'm going to tell this story by using a sort of local example. So there were 6 men that records show escaped from their plantation owner, Edmund Ruffin, in November of 1775. He was the owner of Evergreen Plantation, which is up in Prince George County. He posted a newspaper ad in the Virginia Gazette that gave a few details about these men that ran away from his plantation and asked for cash reward. He offered cash rewards for their return and describes 4 of the 6 men in this newspaper ad, which is more than you get about a lot of enslaved people at the time. Most of the time you get one name, and that's pretty much it. So this is kind of an interesting little piece of the historical record that gives you an idea of what these men were doing at the time and what they made them thinking. So, like I said, 4 of the 6 men were named in this newspaper ad, but then 2 of the 6 go pretty much unmentioned in this, but there is a later document that we'll talk about that kind of sheds more light on their identities. So the 4 men named in the first ad were Harry, Lewis, Aaron, and Matthew. These 4 men are described as being varying in age from about 18 to 30. They were carpenters, wheelwrights, blacksmiths. Many of them did, a lot of different jobs at the plantation. And Ruffin also describes their appearances, what they would have looked like, what they sounded like. And so it's sort of a humanizing view of them that you don't normally see. So, in the newspaper ad, Ruffin briefly describes how these men escaped from his plantation. They commandeered a 2-masted fishing boat that sailed east towards Norfolk. So I've made a map that sort of plots their escape route, which is a long way. 80 miles is a long way to go. 6 men on a little 2-masted boat. They didn't get caught, except 2 of them later will, here at Mulberry Island. 2 of the men that went unnamed in the first ad end up splitting off from the rest of the group here. And we can speculate as to why, but there's no real reason listed. But when they split off here at Mulberry Island, they were recaptured. But the other 4 men, Ruffin thinks, made it all the way down to Norfolk, where Lord Dunmore was camping out in his fleet. And to sort of the reason that they were going to join Lord Dunmore is because about 3 weeks prior to their escape, he issued what is known as Lord Dunmore's Proclamation, which essentially promised freedom to any enslaved person that was able and willing to bear arms for Britain. So Dunmore was in desperate need of soldiers. His army was not doing well. He thought, if I can recruit some of the enslaved people, he also recruited indentured servants from the Patriots, then it will not only bolster his army, but also weaken the Patriots by hurting, the economy by taking away their labor force. By the beginning of the 18th century, Virginia had essentially become what we would call a slave society rather than a society of slaves, meaning that slavery was essential to the operation of Virginia's economic and social systems. The conditions that enslaved people lived and worked in were horrific and cruel, and most of them never had any hope for freedom for their entire lives. And until Dunmore's proclamation, that was really the first time many enslaved people would have had even a glimpse of hope for being able to fight for their own interests, their own freedom. Reports from the days following the proclamation state that slaves flocked to Dunmore in abundance, which resulted in Dunmore being dubbed the most formidable enemy America has by George Washington. Matthew, Harry, Lewis, and Aaron likely did make it to Dunmore's army in Norfolk and would have joined around 300 other formerly enslaved men in what was known as Lord Dunmore's Ethiopian Regiment. Now, you may be wondering, why is it called the Ethiopian Regiment? Surely all of these men were not from Ethiopia specifically. And at the time, Ethiopia was really a term used to describe all people from Africa. It was a very general term sourced from ancient Greek and Roman texts that wrote about Ethiopia and Africa. So it's a general term that was used, and there may be more to it than that, but Dunmore didn't write it down. So the Virginia Gazette in December of 1775 claimed that the black soldiers in this regiment wore uniforms, just like the reenactor here, with "Liberty to Slaves" emblazoned across the front, which at the time was a very bold and shocking statement of really abolition that most white Americans and even enslaved Americans would never have seen before. So it really disturbed and threatened the white patriots because they were fearing the slave rebellion, they were fearing losing their labor force, their entire societal structure being overturned by this. We do lose track of Harry, Lewis, Aaron, and Matthew after they make it to Dunmore's army, as there were no real records of regiment membership. But there are a few possibilities that we can explore of what may have happened to them. So, Lord Dunmore's Ethiopian Regiment served from November 1775 to August of 1776, which is about an 8-month period, where they really didn't see a whole lot of fighting, except for the Battle of Great Bridge, where Dunmore's forces suffered a pretty disastrous defeat, and an estimated 20 Ethiopian regiment soldiers were killed. Dunmore's failure at Great Bridge forced him to retreat and reconsolidate his forces, first at Norfolk, where a skirmish between him and some patriots ended up with the town being burned. And then he went on to Gwynn's Island, which is around the Middle Peninsula, and continued to have around 7 to 8 new arrivals of black recruits a day from the local plantation. By the time Dunmore got to Gwynn's Island, smallpox and typhus were pretty much running rampant through his troops, and it was affecting, in particular, the black soldiers, as fewer of them had been inoculated against the diseases when compared to their white counterparts. By July 1775, almost all of the black troops in Dunmore's army had died from these diseases. Dunmore estimated that he would have had about 2,000 black enlistees starting in that November when he issued the proclamation until July, had it not been for the diseases. And by August, he was only left with a couple hundred able-bodied men. It's likely that Harry, Lewis, Aaron, and Matthew would have died at Great Bridge or from the epidemics at Gwynn's Island. But in the unlikely event that they would have survived, they could have been part of the few surviving black troops that Dunmore took with him when he fled to New York in August of 1776. And they estimate that to be between really 150 to 300 men. So pretty significant loss from 2,000. It was quite devastating. And the black soldiers who did make it to New York would have continued to fight for and work for the British. But rather than being enslaved, they would work as free men who were being paid for their services. The fates of the 4 men who joined Dunmore's army are less certain than those of the 2 men who were recaptured while escaping Ruffin's plantation. These 2 men went unnamed in the first advertisement, but a subsequent petition from Ruffin to the Bedford County House of Delegates reveals more about them. The 2 recaptured men were named Dick and Joe. Their story is reported by Ruffin as follows. Dick and Joe joined the other 4 men taking the boat, sailing down towards Norfolk when they reached Mulberry Island, and they split away from the others for some reason and ended up being captured and brought to the Williamsburg jail, which was notorious for really terrible disease-ridden conditions. Afterwards, Edmund Ruffin identifies them both as his formerly enslaved people, and he's quoted as saying he thinks that Joe was sincerely penitent and wishes to have him restored. And once Ruffin paid Joe's imprisonment fees, he was able to take him back to Evergreen Plantation. Joe's fate after returning to the plantation is unknown, but it's likely he would have suffered severe punishments from Ruffin for having run away. The story of the other man, Dick, was detailed in yet another petition from Ruffin, where he asks for compensation for the loss of his slave, just as one would request payment for damaged or lost property. The Virginia Committee of Safety refused to release Dick to Ruffin because they said that Dick showed, although in jail, an insolent and seditious disposition, so they refused to discharge him, intending as a terror to others to send the said slave to the West Indies or lead mines. However, before the committee could sentence Dick, he died from an unknown cause in the jail. One can speculate that may have been disease or the harsh treatment, it's unknown. But really, we can conclude premature death was probably a mercy for Dick compared to where he would have been sent had he survived. So a common punishment for captured Loyalist blacks was being sent to the Chiswell lead mines, which were in what is modern-day Wchs County, Virginia, out in the west. These mines were major sources of ammunition during the war, and also served as work camps with really brutal conditions for underfed and overworked enslaved captives. The mines were intended to serve as a threat to any enslaved person contemplating escape. And then his other option was essentially the West Indies, where enslaved Africans were legally deemed non-humans and were brutally worked to death on sugar plantations. So the consequences of an enslaved person that was trying to join the British, if they were caught, were truly horrific. And so it must have been a really difficult decision to make, to say, okay, I'm going to run away, and I'm going to go and leave my family members behind, oftentimes. And that really is one of the things that you think about most, is you're not just sacrificing yourself, but you're also potentially putting your family at risk. Patriot newspapers at the time of Dunmore's proclamation encouraged the colonists to, quote, inform slaves that Dunmore proposed to free only those who would bear arms for him, leaving the aged and infirm, the women and children, to bear the brunt of the shorn master's anger. So, being faced with these terrifying prospects, why did enslaved individuals continue to flee and join the British? Before answering that, I think it is important to note that the British were not recruiting blacks out of a desire for the abolition of slavery, but rather to serve their own interests by increasing their manpower while also hurting the Patriots economically. In fact, white loyalists who owned slaves, their enslaved people were never offered freedom. They, in fact, made it very difficult for them to ever run away, because it wasn't about freeing black people, it was about serving their own interests, essentially. Dunmore's proclamation was the first of several British efforts to recruit enslaved black people from the American colonies. And these were later proclamations that will come out were more successful in recruiting higher numbers of enslaved people, because they were not just recruiting men that could fight, but also women and children and older people, anyone who could do a job, basically. As author and historian James Walker states, the Dunmore Proclamation and Britain's subsequent extension of it can only be viewed as an isolated and desperate attempt to bring the rebellious colonies to their knees by any means. But despite the fact that the British never intended to end slavery in America, they did give the impression to many black loyalists that that was sort of their goal, and that once the war ended, they would eradicate slavery. James Walker argues in his article, Blacks as American Loyalists, that an examination of the black loyalists in the American Revolution suggests they were less pro-British than they were pro-black. So the inscription of liberty for slaves on the uniforms of the Ethiopian regiment served to perpetuate this impression, of course. And at that time, slaves were convinced that a British victory would mean the complete abolition of slavery in America. So those who joined the British were doing so in the belief that they were contributing to the freedom of all of their fellow bondsmen. Estimates by historians of the total number of runaways throughout the entire course of the war, numbers vary a lot, but the kind of conservative estimate for it is around 20,000 people would have run away from slavery to join the British. Some people say more, some people say less. It's still up for debate. The loyalist black men and women who joined the British brought a variety of skill sets, from domestic labor to industrial labor to fighting as soldiers or working as spies. For the first time in their lives, these formerly enslaved individuals were paid for their work and could determine their own future. This opportunity was too good to pass up for many enslaved people, including Matthew, Lewis, Aaron, Dick, Harry, and Joe. We can only imagine what they were thinking when they made this choice, but despite the risks, these 6 local men made an incredibly difficult decision to try and take control of their own lives, and ended up sacrificing their lives for the cause, but did contribute to the Black Loyalist movement that would continue throughout the war with thousands of their compatriots joining in. Black Loyalists were individuals who risked everything, not just for their own freedom, but for the freedom of all enslaved people in America. They hoped and they fought for futures that where the sentiments of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in the Declaration of Independence would apply to all Americans, no matter their skin color or ethnicity. Thank you very much. I can take questions. Yes?
With respect to the blacks and the British, so for them to have gone to the British Isles with
Yeah, so...
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, I'm going to. Essentially, he's asking, correct me if I'm wrong, you're asking what would have happened to these people after the war. The British wouldn't have wanted them to come to England.
like some of the white loyalists.
Right, some of the white loyalists wouldn't have wanted the people that joined the cause to be brought to England. And that is, it's honestly a whole other presentation, which is why I didn't talk about it quite as much, because it's fascinating to see what the British, they really had no plan for these black loyalists after the war. They weren't thinking about it, which in hindsight, not such a good idea because it ended up being a mess. Some people were taken to Nova Scotia, a British territory in Canada. You have a couple thousand that were emancipated there. Some of the black loyalists were actually sent to Sierra Leone, where there was a settlement made by the British, intended sort of as like return to your homeland and be free thing, but it didn't really work out that way. Yeah, exactly. And a couple of thousand went to London. It was not as common, and you're correct. They weren't interested in taking care of these people post-war. You'll have a couple individuals who were in New York, where the governor there had a lot of disagreements from, patriots after the war. They say, you took my enslaved people, they're my property, I want them back. And then the British sort of have this moral dilemma of, what do we do? And so some people were returned to slavery after the war, even though they went and fought for the British the entire time. So it's really, it's hard to track all of the people because records from that time are not great on it. But it is, I would recommend looking into it if you are interested, because you can go down a huge rabbit hole. That's sort of what I've done. It's been very interesting. Are there any other questions?
Yeah.
Yes.
How much did it cost to get them out of jail?
How much did it cost to get them out of jail? That, I'm afraid I don't know. It probably would have been, modern money to old-time money, it's kind of a hard conversion to make. So I can't say off the top of my head, but that'd be a good thing to look up too. Anything else?
Yeah, how old were the 4 men?
So 2 of them had their ages, how old were the 4 men that were named? an ad. Two of them had their ages listed. One was 18 and the other was 30. The other two men did not have an age listed with them, but sort of by descriptions they're around that range or possibly a little older. Thank you very much. Have a nice rest of your day.
We love everyone, regardless of race, creed, and color. In fact, if it wasn't for the multiple race ideas and concept, America couldn't be what it is today. So as a Native American, I was born and raised here. I know every inch of Virginia. I used to say, how could you come to Virginia and not marry us? I don't know what you were doing. So I just want to say that, and I want to give my grandfather a compliment. One day he told me, we lived in Crawford Road. We lived in what they call the Jeffersonian home, big, tall, white house. He said, Latrelia? He says, what is this? And he pulled out the dollar bill. I says, $1. He said, where does it come from? I said, they tell me it's made from trees. He says, he pulled out a penny and a quarter and a dime. And he says, Latrelia, where did this come from? I said, I don't know. He says, how about the minerals of the earth? I said, yeah, grandfather. And he rocked back and forth on the chair. And he says, you're going to live in a time where people will kill each other and fight each other for a tree and minerals. And now I realize I never loved money or trees, but we do care about people. And I want to tell you from the bottom of my heart, God bless America again.
Yeah, thank you very much.